If you've been on the fence about buying real estate in the current market cycle, maybe you've been looking for property listings in other cities, maybe you've even found deals that seem like they work, but for some reason you've been hesitant to act on them because you just don't have connections or boots on that ground in the area that give you the confidence to go ahead and pull the trigger. In today's episode, we're going to talk to two investors who did it. They jumped into out-of-state investing on their very first deal, and they have some amazing tips and stories to share with you today. Welcome to the BiggerPockets Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Meyer. And in this episode, we're going to be talking to Shyd and Jessica Coloma about deals that they've done in the last year investing out of state. We're going to learn from them how they went about picking their market and how they wisely diversified a couple of different investing strategies into just a single property. That's a really cool approach. We're also going to hear from their agent, Michael Gallagher, and how he helped them find the right deal without them even coming out to visit the market that they invested in. They're going to share the tricks and tactics that they used. And pay attention because these are strategies and tactics that pretty much anyone can use if you're considering investing out of state. Let's get into it. Jessica, Shyd, Michael, welcome all three of you to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Great. Well, Shyd and Jessica, tell us, where are you guys joining us from?
Right now, we are in Ventura County, California, which is the northern county bordering Los Angeles County.
All right, great. And what about you, Michael?
I sit in Columbus, Ohio.
All right. Well, it sounds like we're in two very different parts of the country. I'm in Amsterdam. We're in all different parts of the world, but I'm excited that we can all be sitting here talking to each other. Shyd and Jessica, let's start with you. I understand your investing journey started a while back when you were walking your dog. What's the story there?
So yes, this is one of my favorite real estate stories to tell. It started off just our regular, evening walk with the dog. And Shyd, I thought was just starting conversation. He was like, what do you think about, owning an investment property as, maybe a passive income kind of thing, but mostly to, start generational wealth, maybe have something in our back pockets for retirement. So what do you think of that? And then thinking, again, this is just dog walking conversation. I was like, yeah, that's something we can explore and talk about and learn about. And Shyd says, okay, good, because I read half a book and I want to refinance on our house. I want to buy an investment property. I want it to be out of state and I want it to be before the end of the year. And
whoa, very specific. I like it.
I was like, oh, I might have missed something in that conversation. But yeah, so considering that this conversation happened July of 2021, we were already in the second half of that year that he wanted to have this all completed by. So, I technically had already said yes. So
you had to do it at that point. It was no longer a choice. Well, Shyd, what got you to read that book in the first place? Something must have piqued your interest about real estate.
Yeah, so for a while, I have been interested in passive investing. I had actually had Brandon Turner's How to Invest in Real Estate book in my Amazon wish list for probably a year and a half. Then COVID happened. Started looking into a little bit more, started reading that book. In that book, as I was, like Jessica said, halfway through, I was like, wow, I really like how there's kind of step-by-steps, what you should do, what to look for. And I was like, I think we could really do this. And that's kind of what kicked it all off.
Okay. And why did you pick out of state? It sounded like you went from reading half a book to having a very specific plan, which is very admirable. But how did you formulate that specific plan?
Yeah. Well, us being in Southern California, Ventura County is a high cost of living. Just running numbers on a standard rental, everything kind of doesn't pencil out really unless you're house hacking or something like that. So knowing that, we had to kind of go look into markets that actually gave us a little bit more of the cash flow that we were looking for at the time.
Got it. Okay. And did you have an easy time or picking a market, or how did you go about that?
No, we didn't. So I don't know, we probably interviewed, I don't know, maybe like 6, 7 different agents from like Texas, South Carolina.
Lots of different states, lots of different cities within those states.
And so at some point, we did settle on Ohio. Actually, there was an episode earlier on the Real Estate Rookie podcast. I think you, Dave, you were the one on it. And I remember Columbus was number 1 or 2 on that list. So I worked for the, at that time, United States Air Force as a contractor, and had gone out to Dayton, Ohio a couple times. And so I was like, well, Dayton I know is next to Columbus. Maybe we'll just settle on there. I've been there before. I know kind of what's there. I kind of looked into the statistics and it kind of worked out. So, at that point, I think after we had talked to 7 different agents, we're like, we just need to pick something now. Heard your podcast, did some research, and I was like, okay, I think Ohio will be it.
Awesome. Well, I assume, Michael, I'm sorry, we haven't forgot about you, but we had to sort of lay the foundation here. I assume, Michael, this is where you entered the picture?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Through the BiggerPockets Agent Finder, Sid and Jessica found me in Dayton, and away we went looking, and actually found their initial property in Dayton on the BiggerPockets classifieds there that are posted on the site. So we found it through that as well.
Okay, great. So before we get back into the story, Michael, maybe you can provide our listeners with some background on the Ohio market, specifically where the deals you guys have done together take place, which is, if I understand correctly, Columbus and Dayton.
Yeah, exactly. So in the whole state of Ohio, you have pretty much 3 primary metropolitan areas. In the northeast of the state is Cleveland. In the literal dead center middle of the state is Columbus, Ohio, which is the capital of the state. And then in the southwestern corner of the state, bordering both Kentucky and Indiana, you have Cincinnati. Secondary markets to what I would consider those primary markets are Dayton, Toledo, and kind of the Akron, Canton, maybe Youngstown area. And then there are further tertiary markets after that. So Dayton is about an hour drive, maybe 45-minute drive from Columbus, directly west on I-70, to give you a reference. Dayton has about roughly 1 million less people than Columbus, so it's significantly smaller. The main economic drivers there are the Air Force Base, the Air Force Museum, University of Dayton, so education is there. The Dayton Children's Hospital is a pretty large medical system there. And then, of course, kind of automation, industry, manufacturing, kind of standard Midwestern type things that you'd expect from a city like that.
And so, Jessica, when you heard about Ohio, what made you confident in these markets?
Well, initially, only Sid had been to Ohio. So again, very beginning, I was literally along for the ride. But I mean, Sid is very data driven. He showed me the numbers. Michael was able to eventually also show me the numbers. I was able to eventually read the book too. I mean, I got the audiobook, so I was able to catch up on that level. But really, it was just seeing the numbers that Michael and Sid were able to generate together.
Great. And tell me about the first deal you wound up buying. What was it?
Ended up being a duplex. Our buy box was small multifamily at the time, long-term buy and hold. So it was a duplex that already had, it was 2 bed, 1 bath on each side, was already tenant occupied. So yeah, we were able to purchase that house. It was relatively cheap at the time. I think around $87,000 is what we ended up buying it for, which is what made us want to go there in the first place, because we knew there's no way we're finding a duplex like that here in California. And so we ran the numbers, ended up working, considering OPEX, CAPEX, property management fees and everything like that. Yeah, ended up working. And then, we ended up pulling the trigger.
Nice. So what about this particular property made sense? Like, what numbers were you looking for? What were you prioritizing in your search?
Yeah, so from the book, I do remember it was kind of like a rule of thumb, of at least each door should give you about $200 cash flow after all expenses are considered. It did meet that. It kind of did go to I think at the time, like a 10% cash on cash, which is kind of what we were going for. We knew it wasn't going to be an appreciation play. We just kind of wanted to get into something that made us feel like we could get started, see if we did like it. So those numbers did make sense. At the end of the day, it did end up cash flowing about like $450-ish a month, depending. But yeah, so it did hit it. And it's been working out.
Awesome. Well, I want everyone to listen to what Sid and Jessica are talking about here, because one of the main reasons it sounds like they were able to pull the trigger on this deal is they knew exactly what they were looking for. And, they acknowledge that there are trade-offs in each market. And even though this deal might not have been the best appreciation play long term, they were prioritizing cash flow and they found it. Now, Michael, I imagine there's a lot of people sitting out here listening to this podcast a little jealous of being able to find cash flowing duplexes for under $100,000. Is this something that's common in Dayton?
In certain areas, yes, absolutely. Dayton's definitely a lower cost market. Even into the suburbs, you can get a nice home for, 250 and under. But certainly in and around downtown, it's not uncommon to see the 1% rule, if not better. Granted, the rents are lower. I mean, average rents, at least in the area of this duplex, are probably $700 to $800 a month. So you're not talking, huge monetary gains, even though the percentages are great. But if you can pick up a $90,000 duplex that grosses $1,400 a month, I mean, that's pretty decent anywhere in my book.
So tell me how this relationship worked when you were remote. Michael, were you going to these properties and then sharing what you saw with Sid and Jessica, or how did it logistically play out?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of my clients are just like Sid and Jessica and are out of state. So I'm very much go to the property, do a lot of video tours, even kind of walk around the block, take videos of the surrounding areas to, make clients feel comfortable with the area they're buying in. And then beyond that, Sid and Jessica actually came to the market after that deal for their next deal. So I was able to show them around in person, obviously. But really using the good old video tour in Google Drive to make everybody feel like they're here as much as possible.
Yeah, so like one of the things that helped us a lot with Michael too is he actually, no kidding, brought up, like a map of Dayton, kind of showed us the various neighborhoods, kind of, these are the areas you probably want to stay away from. These are the areas that, here's where the hospital is, here's where the base is, just to kind of get us acquainted with the area and what real estate investors should be looking for. So it kind of made us feel a little bit more comfortable that we had someone that could kind of guide us through that. And he eventually also did the same thing to us for Columbus.
Got it. Great. And so how is that deal performing now?
So from the time we purchased the property to about maybe just 2 months ago, those tenants actually stayed in there the whole time. And so it was cash flowing. One of the tenants did end up breaking their lease, or not breaking the lease. At the end of their lease, they ended up not extending it. We were going to fix it up. This originally was going to be kind of a burr until the tenants were going to leave. We didn't realize they were going to stay for so long, which is good and bad. But now that we have kind of gone into more appreciating markets, we realize that we probably do want to sell this home now and kind of move it, maybe into another deal in Columbus, maybe another deal out here in California. But yeah, no, it's done great for us. It's, we've been able to work with property managers and we've learned a lot from it.
All right, great. Well, I want to learn more about what you're thinking about doing, but tell me about your property manager, because that is a common area where people who are thinking about investing out of state get tripped up. How did you find your property manager first and foremost?
I mean, we did ask around, a lot of Google research, and I did interview a few. And it was important for us to find a property manager that kind of did a little bit of everything, had a good enough portfolio with other investors. So they know exactly how to work with us, especially as out-of-state investors. We wanted to be sure we had someone with experience in that area, good reviews, making sure we also clicked personally. So again, like with Michael, we were able to talk to them on the phone via Zoom. And yeah, we were just able to find someone that worked with us very well.
I do want to add that the person we bought the property from, they had one of the bigger globally known property managers. So they were kind of all over the country. What we found was that sometimes they were neglecting what was going on with the actual tenants themselves. So the property manager we were looking for, we wanted them to specifically be, just for Dayton. We didn't want them to be all over the place. So that they could provide a little bit more inputs. And we found out that as we were going through the process, our tenants really hated the last property managers, to the point where we were having issues getting into the property because they weren't trusting people. And I know over time, our property manager was able to build better relationships with them and have them understand, no, we're here to help you and make sure you have what you need out of your property.
That's great. I love hearing that story where you're, able to make your investment go better. And at the same time, you're improving the quality of the experience for the tenants. Love that mutually beneficial situation. So Jessica, tell us about your second deal. What came next?
So when we closed on Dayton, we figured it would be a good idea for me to finally actually see Ohio. So we took a flight out there. Basically, as soon as we landed in Columbus, we drove to Dayton. Since it was tenant occupied, we literally just drove by the property, drove around the neighborhood, met with our property manager, and then went back to Columbus, where we finally got to meet Michael in person. And being the hospitable local that he is, he showed us around Columbus, again, both as a local and from an investor standpoint. So we were able to see where are the good pockets that would have good cash flow, good appreciation, at the same time knowing where all the good breweries are. He was able to show us several properties, one of which became our next investment.
All right. And when you're doing a tour like this, Michael, what are the things you focus on showing out-of-state investors?
Oh man, that's a good question. First and foremost, kind of try to cater it to at least what I know about what they're looking for. Columbus is pretty broad and sprawling, so you could really spend all day driving around if you wanted to. So generally trying to just focus in and around the neighborhoods that might have properties of interest to them, and kind of letting them get an idea of the dividing lines between those areas and how they relate to each other and the rest of the city. And then honestly, just try and give them a sense of the town. So I drive them by, a lot of the new developments that are going up. Ohio State University is pretty cool to go see. So bring them by the big football stadium that fits 100 some odd thousand people there. And through the nicer kind of swankier parts of town to give them the full, the full spectrum of everything we have to offer, and, try to give them a local's view mostly, since they're going to be a remote local of sorts.
And how do you compare and contrast Dayton and Columbus? You shared a little bit about that with us, but what type of investors tend to gravitate to Columbus over Dayton?
It's really anybody who's looking for some kind of an appreciation play. I mean, Dayton is, it's really made for people who are either very budget conscious, so they just don't have a lot of capital to outlay. If you're in that all in 150 grand and under range, Dayton is a great city to consider, because for that price point, you're generally going to be able to get a higher quality property in a slightly better area than that price property in Columbus. So just the cost to get in is less in Dayton, and the economic drivers are less diverse. So I mentioned that Dayton is mostly medical, military, and education, and some manufacturing. Columbus has everything. We have Nationwide Insurance is headquartered here. We have a huge fashion presence for whatever reason. Companies like Express and Limited Brands and Bath and Body Works are all headquartered here. We of course have the huge new Intel expansion that people have been talking about online. We got everything from financial institutions to manufacturing and Honda around town. So the diversity is there that provides, I wouldn't say anything is recession proof, but as far as a diversity of economies within Columbus, really, if anything goes down, there's another, industry there to take up any kind of slack that would happen, and as far as I can see.
Got it. Okay. And what kind of deals make sense in Columbus these days?
If you're focused on cash flow or would like to have some cash flow and you're not dealing with a cash purchase, you're probably going to want to look at 2 units or more. Simply put, the single family rental market, the rent to price ratios just don't really support interest rates the way they are at this point. And because at least duplexes are not obviously twice as much as a single family for the same kind of comparable area and rents, you get a little bit of an economies of scale there, where you get double the rent without double the price, essentially. So really 2 units and up have been our bread and butter. Other than that, really just finding deals. We've had some good luck with deals that have been sitting for a while. They're overpriced. Maybe they're a little ugly. They need some work. So if we can come in and do that forced appreciation and make kind of a burr play or something like that, that's been successful also. But kind of the days of 1% single family rentals are, at least turnkey, if you're not going to put some work into them, are few and far between in Columbus as at least what I see.
That's what's going on everywhere, right? Any market that's growing, that tends to be the case. So curious then, Shyd, how did you find a deal that penciled? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so when we closed in December of 2021, we ended up flying to Columbus, I think January of 2022. So it was winter, very cold. And so there were houses that were listed at that point that had been sitting on the market for a while. So those were kind of the ones we aimed for. We kind of kept the same buy box we had from Dayton, basically looking again for small multifamily between 2 and 4 units. And the original plan was kind of to do the long-term rental strategy again, but we'll talk more about that maybe later. So we found one, the one we eventually ended up getting into, had been sitting on the market for, oh gosh, I don't remember now. It was more than 100 days, definitely. And it was a flip, so it did have newer amenities in there. There were some issues with the property itself, but that's how we kind of started. And the fact that Michael was like, okay, yeah, this is this is the community it's in, this is what's nearby. This is, these are the different strategies that you can do. He talked about kind of the concept of midterm rentals. He talked about how short-term rentals are going on over there too. And then he also compared it to what long-term rental would be. So we kind of got the whole gamut of what the potential options are. And so I ran numbers actually as short-term, midterm, and long-term. And across the board, they all worked. And at that point, it was just kind of, okay, what do we actually want to do now?
Okay, so I'm curious because you're describing a property that has some updates, there's some issues with it, but it's a solid property, been flipped. It's been, it works numbers wise. Why was it sitting on the market for 100 days?
First and foremost, it was a duplex. However, something interesting about this property was that they had split the parcel down the middle and they had tried to condo the building, or they had condoed the building. And so this has been a somewhat popular-ish thing to do for flippers in and around the downtowns in Columbus. We have quite a few 100-plus-year-old side-by-side townhouse-style duplexes, and it's quite common for them to do full gut rehabs and end up with essentially 2 units, and then they split it down the middle and try and maximize their profit by selling them off as a condo. The issue around the timing of this property was that they were trying to sell them off around the $240 price point each, where they had them listed. And for that price at this time, this was circa 2022 or early 2022, I think. You could get into a decent single family home for that same price, and not have a shared wall with somebody. So just the target market for who they were trying to sell this property to, I think was lower than or less than a standard property would have sold for, or would have been targeting. And then in addition to that, it was only a 2-bed on each side. So then again, you're reducing kind of your buyer pool a little bit more, because house hackers or, people with a family, or even just from a rental marketing standpoint, 3 bedrooms is generally a little bit more desirable than 2 bedrooms. So that's kind of why it was sitting for so long. In my opinion, is they were trying to really get top dollar, and they had somewhat made it a very specific property. It wasn't attractive to a lot of different people from that standpoint.
So did you negotiate down the price then?
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. If I remember correctly, because Sid and Jessica were offering to purchase it as a duplex instead of each unit, we were able to get a pretty good price reduction. I think it was about $40,000 total between the 2 units we were able to negotiate, and then got some additional credits and things during the transaction. So it was definitely done from a position of power for sure, the negotiating. Yeah.
Great. That's awesome. So Jessica, what happened from there?
Eventually, we were just like, well, what are we going to do now? And we decided okay, Michael had introduced the potential of short-term rentals and how that can work in Columbus. So we were like, okay, let's try the short-term strategy, but do it a little conservatively. So we decided to do one side of the duplex was going to be long-term. The other side, we were going to set it up as short-term, an Airbnb. So in order not to lose any time between when we finally close and when we can go up live on Airbnb, we decided to, try and get it ready and fixed during the closing process. So I was shopping for furniture. We were finding things that were wrong with the property, based on the general inspection we've gotten, trying to get credits for plumbing, brick. The gutters froze and fell off at one point. There was the windows were new but not working. So it was just a whole lot of things just started happening during the process. And Michael was there for all of it while we're in Colufornia. So again, we were trying to get this closed while I was sending furniture over there. And our closing date kept getting pushed. And I think Sid can talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, so we were sending furniture to this house that we technically didn't own. So we were fancy squatters. Yeah,
so just some of the other things that happened during all of this. So Michael had talked about the kind of condo to duplex conversion. We had written the contract that we wanted to buy it as a duplex. Maybe like 2 weeks before we were supposed to close, the loan officer came back and said, hey, it looks like this is still a condo. We're not going to be able to close. We need to make sure that it is, no kidding, a duplex. And so, Michael, again, had to kind of go through with the city and try to figure that out. We had to make amendments to the contract and just other things like that. Other things that were happening at the time is, so we decided to try and do a debt service coverage ratio loan on this just to kind of see how that worked out. One thing we found out about DSCR loans at that time was they did not lock rates until you actually completed the appraisal. And as we were going through that process is when Ukraine got invaded by Russia. So like every day more news came out, the interest rate kept climbing. There were points where we were going to pull out the deal because of just between all the stuff that was going on with the house, the interest rates, us getting just super nervous about all of this. I do remember calling Michael. I was on a work trip. I called him as all of this was happening, and I asked him, like, Michael, is this still a good idea for us to do this? If not if we're your not that we're your clients, but would you go through with this actual investment yourself? Right? Because at that point, I was ready to just pull the plug. Michael reminded us about kind of what was going on, what the future play is, reminding that if we are kind of doing this as a buy and hold, as our original plan, that, seeing everything that's being done in Columbus, eventually, this will work out and it's still a good idea. When we ran the numbers, it wasn't that bad. Like, I think originally it was going to be like a 15 or 20% cash on cash, and it brought down to like 8% after we kind of did the math with the new interest rates that were coming in. So still not bad, just wasn't as good as we had originally hoped. But yeah, it all ended up working out. We did end up buying the property, and today now it's going okay.
It's still running.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, I mean, an 8% cash on cash return is still awesome. So congratulations. It's still a great return on your investment. Now, it sounds like, though, you kind of wanted to switch from Dayton to Columbus to get appreciation, not cash flows. Was that sort of your goal for this second property?
Yeah. I mean, after we did do the tour with Michael, seeing what Dayton looked like in comparison to what was going on in Columbus, he did show us kind of the path of progress that was going on in and around Ohio. At that point, we did hear about all the new things that were happening with like the Intel plant. I mean, we saw all the construction that was going on and the revival that they were trying to do, in and around the downtown areas as well. So it just gave us a really good feel. Like, as we were going through there, me and Jessica actually, going to the breweries and going to like the restaurants, we actually felt like we were back in Los Angeles, which was weird. We always thought of Ohio as kind of being, not cornfields, but just a little more, not so much like of the life like that. So it was very interesting to us. So we could see ourselves like living there. We're like, wow, if this is like this and it's going to continue to grow, I could see why, people would want to continue investing and, living here.
Awesome. And so tell us, you said the deal is performing well. What does that look like?
It's currently now a midterm rental and a long-term rental. In the last year, depending on seasonality, because in the wintertime, we do bring our prices down lower for the midterm side. It ranges anywhere between like $800 to like $2,000 a month in cash flow. The summertime being when it kind of goes up to that higher end, just because of what's going on in the area and kind of what the standard market price range is.
All right, great. So tell me, are you going to buy in Columbus again? What's the plan next?
Yeah, so we actually did purchase another property in Columbus after that one. And as we said, we're in the process of right now selling the duplex in Dayton, which again, Michael is actually the one representing us on that one. After we pull out from the property in Dayton, we may or may not do Columbus again right away. We're trying to figure out right now what's the best thing. We are currently house hacking here in California as well. So it's kind of a play between, what might end up working. But we're kind of asking Michael to kind of keep the pulse on there for us Once we finally do close on Dayton, we'll probably have another conversation with Michael of what currently is available. But I mean, we're more than happy to do more in Columbus because we do still believe in that market. But, with interest rates and everything that's kind of going on, we're kind of having to make sure everything makes sense.
For sure. Yeah, that does make sense. So, Michael, what deals are going on in Columbus these days?
A lot of it is distress. A lot of the investors are still getting deals done for people who have to sell. There's plenty of burrs and flips and things still happening. Those markets are still pretty strong. Like I said, the single family rentals are hard to make work unless you're going to do some significant rehabbing and everything to them. But other than that, I mean, the rental markets are strong. Anything from 2 units and up has some decent underlying numbers. Getting to the 1% rule, even in a triplex or a quad is, I wouldn't say a given. It probably depends on the part of town you're in. But it's certainly attainable to get to the 0.7 or kind of 0.8 range. And usually at that, you're starting to at least break even or make a little bit of money per unit after you pay all your expenses. So we have a good amount of building happening on the multifamily side of apartments and everything like that. So those are going on in town. And I just looked it up, just had I think it was the 4th or the 5th strongest rent growth in the country month over month last month at 17%. So
oh my God.
Rental market's still going strong and everything like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you for sharing that knowledge about Columbus. It's definitely a popular, very exciting market. Lots of great stuff going on there. Shyd and Jessica, before we get out of here, do you have any last advice to investors who are thinking about investing out of state? You both were able to pull the trigger. How would you advise other investors to do the same?
I think the biggest thing is not to get stuck in analysis paralysis. Obviously for Shyd, he read half a book and, he had a plan. But even then, being as data-driven as he is, we know we could have gotten stuck on, the numbers and making sure everything was perfect. But Dayton worked. As Michael said, it was a lower barrier to entry. And, we just wanted to see that it worked. We pulled the trigger on what we saw after running our numbers and everything just took off from there. So it's just being brave to actually take action is, I think, one of the bigger things.
Yeah, and I think for me, after we started going through this, it kind of felt like we're on this island by ourselves investing. And so after we kind of got into the first deal, we started attending meetups. We joined Facebook groups. Columbus has a great one for a lot of investors in the area. And it just kind of, gave us that sense of community and knowing that these are things that we can do as we were coming across problems with the property, with property managers, with managing out of state. We were able to commiserate with a lot of other people here in California and even out in Columbus. We've made so many friends that we can just reach out to now. We really don't feel like we're in this alone.
That's great. And do want to help people understand that one of the main things and remind them that one of the main things that Shyd and Jessica mentioned in terms of how they got over analysis paralysis was picking a market and speaking to a lot of agents, just like Michael. And if you do want to connect with an agent who can help you navigate some of your markets, you can do that on biggerpockets.com/agents. Michael, Shyd, Jessica, congratulations on these very exciting deals and on finding one another and helping each other get these cool deals. For anyone who wants to connect with Michael, Shyd, or Jessica, we will put their contact information in the show notes below. Thanks again for joining us, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.